What's going on, guys? Welcome back, episode 3. Today's topic is all about lat bias, so AKA latissimus dorsi. Today we're going to talk about the origin, insertion, and how to bias the lat when we're training. Now you should all know by now where the lat inserts, right about here. It's also the insertion point of the long head of the bicep and the pec fibers. You can go back and watch the previous episode if you want a little bit more on that one. Now, where does the lat originate? The lat originates on the back, obviously, T6 to T12, so the thoracic vertebrae, T6 to T12, and then L1 to L5, so lumbar 1 to 5. Now, just to be aware that the lat origin does not originate from the vertebrae itself, it ties into the fascia, especially when we're looking at the L5 region. L1 to L5 is covered in thoracolumbar fascia, so that fancy Christmas tree looking muscle on people's back, it's not muscle, it's fascia. That's where the lat originates, on that region. Now, I want you to have a look next time you're in the gym at someone from the side on. If you can see someone's back, where the curvature of someone's back is, the apex of that curvature is around T6, so thoracic vertebrae 6. That is where the lat originates from there to T12 and then L1 to L5. So now we've got a little bit of the insertion origin covered. Let's go into talking about actually biasing the lat when we're training. This comes down to hand position. So the hand grip will dictate the elbow path, which will hit the target muscle area that you're trying to hit on your back. We will go into upper back training in another episode, but today we're biasing the lat, and that will be looking at a neutral grip position. So if you think about steering wheel, driving your car, that is going to be a neutral grip. This will generally, 90% of the time, bias the lat, and this is why when we're holding a neutral grip, the elbow path will be driving down in towards the hip pocket. So if we're doing a low row, you're going to be driving that elbow into the hip pocket. If we're going to be doing a pull down, we will be also driving that elbow into the hip pocket. A quick hand grip variation is going to be neutral. Pronate is going to target upper back bias. Again, we'll go into that next time. And then looking at a supinated grip, so underhand grip, will generally target lats as well, because it's going to drive the elbow down into the hip pocket. Today we're going to look at the low row and how to bias the lat without targeting upper back muscles, okay? Right guys, when we're using the low row, we are going to be driving the elbow down into the hip pocket, contracting the lat in the short as much as possible. Think about if you're soaring, you want this type of motion, okay? You want to be driving the fist into the floor, elbow into the hip pocket, soaring motion. I'm always going to opt for a supporting leg to support the working arm. I'm going to drive my foot into the floor, keep my core nice and tight. I want to make sure my hips and pelvis is nice and square to the stack. Nice neutral spine, dropping my rib cage, so stacking my rib cage over the pelvis, and then I'm going to drive my elbow down into my hip pocket, squeeze the lat as hard as possible, and then release, allow that lat to lengthen as much as possible, and then drive it back in and squeeze. Now if you can see guys that my elbow does not bypass the rib cage, my lat is fully shortened here. If my elbow drives past my rib cage, I'm going to start targeting rear delts and upper back muscles. So for me to get my lat fully shortened, I need to drive my fist into the floor ever so slightly, drive my elbow down into the hip pocket, and squeeze super tight. I can't pull this weight or my elbow back any further because my lat is contracted as hard as it is, and I've shortened the lat as much as I can. Driving in, squeeze, and release. One thing we want to look at, guys, and I see this all the time, you'll see people crunched over doing this, thinking that they're shortening their lat. They're actually not. They're contracting and shortening their oblique muscle, which will actually inhibit you shortening your lat. as much as possible. You think you're getting a harder contraction because you're co-contracting the obliques, but the obliques is shortening, and it's going to take away from you from lengthening and shortening that lat. So try and keep your body upright as much as possible when performing this. So I want to keep my rib cage stacked. Always stack the rib cage, guys. Driving in, squeeze, nice control, pause. Don't get me wrong, when you get towards the end of your working set and you're reaching your end range of reps, you might be driving down ever so slightly, and that's just because you're fatigued. Your core's probably slightly fatigued from holding the rib cage down, and you're doing everything in your power to drive that elbow down and in. Now, if we were to talk about a resistance profiling, strength curve here, especially with resistance profiling, this weight is going to be heavy here in the stretch position, it's going to be heavy in the mid-range, and it's going to be heavy in the short range. That's because this weight stack is just going up and down, I'm pulling back and forth. If I was on a specific machine, like a prime machine, I would be able to load different curvatures of that machine. So imagine there was a C in front of me, right? So I'm on a machine, and there's a big C coming round here, right? If I was to load the top part, when I pulled the weight back, and then that weight dropped down as I'm in the short, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to get into the short. We're always going to be strongest from the lengthened position, from this end range to the mid range, and then we're always going to struggle to get from the mid range to the short range when our muscles are fatigued, right? If you're on a machine that has a strength curve to it, a resistance profile, we can dictate or manipulate different areas of loading that machine to make it easier to get into the short. So what I would always opt to do on this exercise is on your first working set, as it's the heaviest amount of load, spend time in the short. If you're lucky enough to have equipment like Prime, then you're blessed at the end of the day. Now, I have to manipulate my training setup in this gym because I don't have that luxury of Prime equipment. So I'm always going to opt on my heaviest set to prioritize time spent in the shortened range, because by the time I come to my second set, it's going to be a lot harder for me to get into the short. That's why I'll always drop my weight for set 2. I'll reduce the load for set 2, so I can still work it in the short, but I will prioritize lengthening my muscles just for the fact that I'm so fatigued. So if set 1 looks like this, imagine this is my top set, heavy set. Let's put some load on it. This is my top set, okay? And I'm gonna do 8 to 10 reps. Imagine I'm at rep 6 already, yeah? So I'm gonna be squeezing, spending time here, micro pausing in the lengthen, drive it back in, squeeze for 2, pause, pull. I'm over exaggerating a little bit, guys, here, right, for time's sake, okay? Now imagine this is my last rep and I'm driving that elbow into the hip pocket. I'm driving it in, squeezing, I'm spending time in the short. It's actually pretty heavy. Right, I'm starting to back off from the short range now, so I'm going to keep working and try and shorten that lat as much as possible. I'm going to keep driving till I got nothing. That'd be set 1, okay? Now set 2, I would probably reduce that weight ever so slightly, micro pause in the short so I can still get it there, but then I can control it on the way out, and then prioritize lengthening my lat. Now here's a huge tip here, guys. If you're face onto your stack, right, and I'm lengthening my lat on the way, I'm gonna rotate my torso away from the working arm ever so slightly, not rotating at the hips, rotating the torso away ever so slightly to allow that lat to lengthen as much as possible. And then as I drive in, one swift motion, I'll tee it back up nice and square. I'll lengthen it. Once my arm gets level, I'll then rotate away from that working arm ever so slightly. This is going to allow me to get even more lat stretch. It's quite a hard technique to do, so just practice it. some of you may already be doing this, but if you can get it right, you will actually lengthen that lat a lot more than just sitting square on. Now, if you're a beginner and you're quite new to this, you're a bit of a novice when it comes to lat bias training, just stay square on, okay, and just work squeezing that lat in the short. Feel that you're shortening the lat. You can still lengthen the lat square onto the stack. Just feel your lat lengthen. What we don't want is the shoulder protracting too much. We want to engage the lat, lengthen it, keep that on to a certain degree, keep the tension on the lat, and then torso rotate away, and you will feel that lat stretch. So we're going to prioritize a 2 count in the lengthened. Okay, so we're going to come in, squeeze, micro pause. My arm's fully lengthened now. Now all I'm going to do is rotate my trunk away from that working arm. And you see how I'm lengthening that a little bit more in my lat? Pause here for 2, 1, 2, drive it back in, squeeze. Okay, I'm nice and square, rotate away from the working arm ever so slightly, more lat stretch, and 1 swift movement, I'm going to come back in nice and square. Okay, arms level, slight rotation away, pause, 2, drive in, squeeze and go. If you can, on your second set, contract, feel that harsh contraction without spending too long there, and then slowly release, you're going to fire that lat up, and then you're going to eccentrically load it on the way out. You're going to create so much fucking tension and stimulus on this muscle. Your lats are going to be like, you're going to be like walking around like you've got watermelons under your arms, I'm telling you. If you can get this right, the torso rotation away from the working arm, it's an elite trick to get more lat length. Now, I'm going to talk to you guys about programming and how I program in and how I find programming lat bias and upper back bias different on certain days, or how I structure it. But if you can spend the first half of your session lat bias training shortening the lat, then the second half of the session spend loading it in the length position. I would generally prioritize loading a muscle in the lengthened position over shortening it, due to hypertrophy response and from the studies and the results that have come from that. But again, it's so important to be able to be aware of contracting that muscle. Now, it's not how long you can stretch a muscle, it's how long you can load a muscle in a stretched position to create even more stimulus and stress on that muscle. So just be aware of that, guys, okay? Now, when we're training lat bias and we are pulling from a high pull down position, we always want to make sure we've got a straight upper body, okay? When we're upper back training, it's slightly different. Upper back training, we probably will lean back a little bit more because we're gonna drive out and round. But for lat, we want to make sure, even with upper back training, we're gonna keep the rib cage stacked always, because that's just gonna support lower back. It's going to keep the core nice and tight. It's going to keep the hips in, pelvis in, everything nice and square. It's going to keep that trunk tidy, and then you can then really prioritize loading the target muscle area. But when you're training lat from a high pull down, you want to be upright and you want to be able to drive that elbow down and in. Now think about it, the lat inserts on the humerus, okay, in a slight groove down here called the intravicular groove. So when that lat is up in the, when that arm is up in the air, that lat that's originating from the back and coming up under the armpit, it's going to get a huge amount of stretch up here. It's so important that we don't allow the shoulder to be pulled right up here, because we want to maintain everything in nice and square, so when I drive down, that lat's going to contract. Okay? So just be mindful of that when you're pulling from a high pulling position. Again, another thing is be mindful of, if you're training on a piece of equipment, if you're pulling from a high area and you can't adjust the height, you might have to either adjust your hand grip or adjust the hand grip accessory in order to target specific muscle groups. Because if you're going to pull down from here and your seat's under here and your starting pulling point is up here, well, you're going to have to lean back to a certain degree, and it might just not bias the lat enough because it's throwing you out of position. You might have to bring your seat back, you might have to change the hand grips, you might have to put D handles on in order for you to target what we want to try and achieve, okay? So let me know how you go on this one, guys. We will look into upper back. We'll probably do that in the next video, right? Just so we can keep it kind of close. Remember, the hand grip dictates the elbow path or the line of pull that will target the muscle area on your back. If we're training lats, again, look, if you're training back, you're still gonna target upper back muscles and lats at the same time, but it's how we drive the elbow path to then dictate which group of muscles we want to stimulate more or bias the most, okay? So just a quick one, hands down by the sides, elbows down by the hip pocket is going to bias lat, especially lower lat, all right? This machine is gonna hit a lot of lower lat. Then we come up a little bit more, we're gonna bias the lat still, but we might hit a little bit higher up on the lat. And then we start coming up into this 45-degree region. We're gonna hit top lat, rear delts, and then we come up a little bit more, we're gonna hit rear delts and traps, rhomboids. So just be mindful of what you're training. If you're struggling, let me know, reach out to me, I'll be happy to help. And yeah, go and grow that fucking huge dense back. We will go into programming back down the track and how I prioritize loading in the lengthened, in the short, and then the muscle groups that I pick at certain times of the session and the machines that I use, especially when I can't use a resistance profile. I hope you've enjoyed this one, guy. Peace out. I'll see you next time.